Nask here. False alarm from the end of part 1. Thankfully, it wasn't an aneurysm after all. Seems I just got laughing a bit too hard on that last half there. Not gonna lie, I'm gonna be hard-pressed to not start laughing my ass off about the SJW thing again. Oh, no. 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 Can't get myself started again. Alright, so back to it then. Today we'll be doing part 2, going over some more questions from the Reasonable Questions for Anti-SJWs video. We've got plenty more of this video to cover and plenty more questions of theirs to address. With any luck, I can tackle them appropriately and provide sufficient responses, and maybe even get some giggles out of it along the way. I'll try to keep things fairly lighthearted and such if I can, but we'll obviously have to answer these questions honestly and reasonably for the sake of the content, and try to toss in some jokes if I can so as to not bore you all with my generally droning voice. I'm fully aware of what it sounds like. I'd know. I have to edit this shit. Hope you all enjoy what's coming up. So with that, let's get to it then.
Why don't you seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views?
We're actually extremely concerned with feminist theory in academia. It's an issue that is addressed regularly, similarly with social justice and intersectional theory in academia, and the detrimental effects it can, does, and will have, both in the short term as well as the long. Wrecking people for views is just an added bonus to it all. If we can have some fun and entertain people while we give that kind of shit the old 1-2, then we absolutely will.
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate?
I can't speak for anyone else, but if I had to throw one right off the top of my head, then Christina Hoff Sommers would be my go-to gal. Funny, intelligent, reasonable, and witty. She's the whole damn package, plus the bag of chips.
Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting?
I haven't personally read any because I was born and raised with the blossoming of the internet. And so if I'm going to do any kind of research on second-wave feminists, I basically have the compendium of human knowledge at my fingertips to find out what these people have said and done in their lives, and related information to their stances and ideologies to use as references in determining who says or believes what, and determining what I agree or disagree with.
Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
And of course, there is nothing at all wrong with curiosity. Feminism has always had a wide variety of viewpoints on a plethora of issues depending on the feminist you're dealing with. As mentioned before, Christina Hoff Sommers is one such second-wave feminist whom I hold in high regard, but there are plenty of others as well. Some of these women have, like anyone else at all really, views that I would agree with and those that I do not. Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, Yoko Ono, and Maya Angelou are all such women that I would have both agreements and disagreements with, entirely dependent on the topic at hand, but in the general sense I applaud and respect the efforts they made for real and effective equality, as well as the empowerment of women in society and helping to shape our cultural outlooks on the lives, opportunities, and value of women and men as equals. Certain obvious and distinct differences withstanding, of course. When it comes to third-wave feminism, however, it's an entirely different story. Third-wave feminism is the point at which you take things too far, where it's no longer an issue of general equality, but attempting to elevate women to unreasonable and unrealistic levels, where intersectionalism infects ideas and promotes divisiveness and negativity, where women believe they can think themselves superior while also playing the victim, where women can demand special rights, privileges, and protections at the same time as calling themselves strong and independent, where women can try to shrug off personal responsibility in favor of convincing the world that they, in a free, open, democratic, pluralistic society, are oppressed and that the burden of proof should never apply to them. Third-wave feminism, unlike the second wave, is not a movement of equality. It's a movement of supremacy. It's a movement strictly dedicated to giving women all possible benefits, while abandoning effort, personal responsibility, and any of the downsides of operating in a just and civil society.
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right?
Obviously it won't. That's why we don't judge a book by its cover, so to speak. It's precisely why we read the books, we read the articles, we watch the entire videos, and though we may have to take only snippets from them in order to help reinforce our arguments, We have the courtesy of at least providing the sources so as to allow viewers to read or watch and judge for themselves. Perhaps you should actually watch our videos sometime, instead of just reading the titles or watching 15 seconds of them and going on to judge them purely based on such limited information. It might also help to actually check our description boxes, because that's usually where our sources can be found. Just a thought, Michael.
That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
By reading or viewing feminist sources, and many of them, we gain quite a valuable insight as to what they are trying to say actually. Concurrently, we also read and view the things that feminists say and do. It provides us a better level of context for the aforementioned sources, to see if and how these viewpoints of theirs are put into real-world practice. We would be foolish not to indulge in every bit of information we can reasonably acquire before making any kind of arguments or claims, lest we end up seeming ignorant and outlandish. You know, Michael, like when a feminist calls someone a sexist or a misogynist, without any reasonable sources or context to support it, but merely due to disagreeing with them or demanding evidence.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now?
It may, and this is just a guess here, have something to do with the fact that this so-called study was very poorly managed, with many discrepancies and vague variabilities, and in the scientific community is overwhelmingly considered biased and poorly done, as well as the fact that far more reputable sources of information clearly and severely contradict the findings of such a study. An argument based on poor reasoning and flawed data is hardly, if at all, an argument worth making. All this reason, logic, and evidence-based argumentation really does help out in the long run, especially the evidence-based portion of it. Evidence. Proof. You might want to start applying some of that to your arguments someday.
Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Does it maybe?
Correction. We have read the study, as well as countless others, including those who specialize in fields such as scientific studies, and both they and ourselves continuously find this study extremely lacking. Not to mention that your entire stance and viewpoint relies on the basis of a single flawed quote-unquote study, while we have years and years worth of information from far more reputable sources to debunk it.
Does it? Nah, it's fine. It's the feminazis. We have to stop them. They're taking away our video games.
It's one of many concerns, yes. Third wave feminism in action, after all.
Look, Anita, I'm sorry, but I can't actually destroy video games. That doesn't make any sense.
It wouldn't honestly surprise me if third wave feminists did run off and go crying to mommy when they got their worldview challenged and thoroughly debunked. Wah, Anita, they won't just listen to and believe everything I say. They keep saying I need evidence and proof. And they were dismissing me by calling me a liar and arguing against me. Wah. You've got a brain, you walking epitome of a shriveled cunt. So maybe try and actually employ it one of these days if you could be so kind.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people.
Because it is possible. Probably because, the last I checked, Islam is a religion, an ideology. A Muslim is simply a believer and adherent to the ideology of Islam. One is an idea, the other is a person. You can criticize an idea without criticizing the individual. No different than I can criticize the idea that boiling broccoli is more nutritious than steaming it, without criticizing the individuals who prefer their broccoli boiled instead of steamed. An idea or a belief is not a strict definer of a person. Ideas can be challenged. Beliefs can be changed, while the individual, as they themselves are, remain essentially the same. The ideology and the individual are not mutually exclusive. One can, in fact, exist as it is without the other.
And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out, at least not that I can see.
If people are going to use terms like raghead or camel fucker, such terms aren't in any relation to a person being a Muslim. They're slurs that some people apply to essentially anyone of Middle Eastern descent. They're strictly racial, and last I checked, Islam is a religion, not a race. I won't lie though, camel fucker always gives me a bit of a giggle. It's like the only bestiality-focused racial insult I've ever heard applied to anyone. So it's rather pretty amusingly unique. However, scrolling through the comment sections of our videos that criticize Islam is in no way representative of us or our arguments. We don't leave these comments. They're left by completely separate individuals, and as such, we aren't responsible for them. As for why they would say things like raghead and camel fucker in the comment sections of videos criticizing Islam, well, the overwhelming majority of Muslims in the world are of Middle Eastern descent, so statistically their racial slurs would apply. It doesn't make them true, particularly the camel fucker one, but they apply racially and geographically nonetheless. As for people taking serious shots at Islam, however, this goes back to my initial response. Islam is an ideology, and anyone is free to criticize an idea, especially when that idea is often very definitively in opposition to the ideals and standards of one's own society, such as the modern, democratic, pluralistic, equal societies we have here in the West, be it from the ideals of equal rights and opportunity, the treatment of women, the concept of slavery, the views on violence and murder, freedom of speech and religion, and plenty more. Sometimes certain ideas have to be criticized, because if they aren't, they'll never change. And I very highly doubt you would rather live under a theocratic patriarchy based on Sharia law over the ideals and society we've developed in this end of the world.
So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people in their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you?
Because it is not our job, nor is it our obligation, to demand anyone, even bigots, think a certain way. Our goals instead are to simply present our arguments for or against certain ideas and ideologies, such as Islam or feminism. By not addressing the minority of voices with bigoted views, we are not, by default, condoning, respecting, or agreeing with their views. It would be like if I were making an argument against feminism and someone happened to leave a comment saying that women only belong in the kitchen and the bedroom. It doesn't mean I agree with them if I don't address it. It simply means that I choose not to address it. If that's what they believe, then so be it. And perhaps I would make an argument at a later time exploring the benefits of equality between the sexes and a woman's right to self-determination, which could hopefully convince some people with such views to address their own ideas. But in the meantime, their views are in no way reflective of my own. A few shitty comments that I don't respond to doesn't automatically mean that I also believe women should just be obedient fuckdoll sandwich makers.
And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
I would personally be more than happy to have anyone who could be considered a moderate Muslim on my channels, streams, hangouts, etc., in order to have thorough and informative discussions. That's the beauty and benefit of the exchange of ideas and information. The more you know, the better. It obviously doesn't mean that I would agree or disagree with them on any particular subject, nor would it mean that either of us would convince the other to embrace any of our arguments. It would, in the least, be an opportunity to ask questions and receive responses in order to more appropriately grasp the concept of what a moderate Muslim would believe, so long as the conversation were to remain civil and intellectual.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general?
In this country, as well as every other modern, democratic, pluralistic society, absolutely. When you can find me a standing law in this country that is specifically racialized to the detriment of blacks, then perhaps I may start to see things differently. You aren't slaves, Jim Crow laws are abolished, and you have every single right and opportunity that I, as a white man, do. If you didn't, then the evidence would be pretty blatantly clear, and this question wouldn't even need to be asked.
If so, what? Okay, just step over. Just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
Are you implying that I'm not smart because I'm white? Are you saying that you're better than me because you're black? How racist!
If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
This would primarily be due to groups like Black Lives Matter not wanting to actually address issues involving race and racism, but instead to drum up anti-white black supremacy sentiments. Racism has, does, and always will exist, and short of reading minds and forming a thought Gestapo, it would never go away, because there will always be someone somewhere who thinks racist thoughts or holds racist views, no matter what the color of their skin is. I'd be wary of the thought Gestapo, however, because I'm fairly certain having them march around is essentially the definitive sign that we've lost our individual rights and entered a dystopian authoritarianism. Our laws do not allow for any form of institutional or systemic racism to exist. The issue of race is essentially a non-issue in this day and age. If we had to, however, delve into the problems surrounding particular racial communities, such as the black community, what with its disproportionate levels of crime, gang activity, drugs, poor education, single-mother households, and so on, then those issues can be addressed. But that doesn't make them issues of race. They make them issues of culture. The problems within the black communities in this country can be tackled and rectified for the better by addressing the problems themselves and the kind of cultures that breed such issues. These will not be resolved, however, by rioting, defending criminals who are the very product of the current culture, committing violence towards law enforcement, or denying them the ability to protect these communities, or breeding and fanning the flames of anti-white rhetoric and sentiments, which serve to do nothing more than exacerbate and increase racial tensions and divisions.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black-on-black crime, when are you going to do a video about white-on-white crime and what we, as white people, can do to solve the problems in our community?
Black-on-black crime is an issue, as is white-on-white crime. It's crime. The focus to black-on-black crime, however, is threefold. As a focus on the vastly disproportionate amount of crime that exists in the black community, as a counter-argument to the Black Lives Matter narrative that police are such a massive threat to the lives of innocent black people, as well as to call out groups such as Black Lives Matter for ignoring the most clear and present danger to black lives in this country, which is other black lives. The issue of white-on-white crime is an issue that we acknowledge, same as black-on-black crime, white-on-black crime, black-on-white crime, etc., etc., because they are issues of crime in and of itself. We don't have a bunch of people marching through the streets, however, accusing blacks of being the biggest threat to white lives, or saying that white lives matter because the majority of people killed by police are in fact white. On that note, however, Black Lives Matter consistently argues that blacks are disproportionately killed by police, which is essentially true, but ignores the fact that blacks also commit a vastly disproportionate amount of crime in this country, and are therefore disproportionately likely to experience encounters with law enforcement. When Black Lives Matter can begin to address the issues in its own communities, then perhaps we can finally begin to address these issues as a whole, rather than on the basis of skin color.
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, "No! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!"
Firstly, I would say we don't freak out about it, we address it. To this little screenshot of yours, however, I'd like to invite Michael back to the stage.
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right?
Secondly, I'd like to say about Milo there, I believe you mean she and her, not he or him. Thirdly, it's something to address, not freak out over, obviously, you bumbling twat. Partially due to the reason that her definition of racism is very clearly a warped and ideologically driven one, formed and pushed by the social justice movement using the very divisive and racialized concepts of intersectionalism, and as such is very clearly an improper and biased method of instigating anti-white sentiments in this country, but also due to the fact that Milo is a fucking teenager. I honestly don't care what kind of justifications you try to conjure up, but the fact remains. Milo is a teenager, a stupid, ignorant, inexperienced teenager who hasn't seen enough of life or fully developed cognitively to be able to reasonably make assertions on such complex matters.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity?
I didn't, because that's a completely idiotic idea. Racism is essentially a mindset or belief that one's own race is somehow, in some way, superior to another, several others, or all others, or an action driven by a mindset or belief, whereas violence, disparagement, laws, etc. are applied strictly and directly against one or more race that one would personally deem inferior. There's a key word in there though, Steve. Personally. Racism is in no way a self-appointed identity, but is entirely personal and individual. A racist can be spotted by their actions or certain forms of speech by other third parties, as most genuine racists aren't even aware that they are racist. Kind of like the idea that crazy people don't know that they're crazy. That's what makes them crazy. Racism is never genuinely self-appointed. No different than social justice ideas of these 76 so-called genders, or teenagers on Tumblr constantly self-diagnosing mental disorders like they're a fad, or feminists going around calling anything that offends them or they're uncomfortable with as rape.
And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism?
No true racist is a self-appointed one. See prior response. And racism can be mitigated, sure, but you won't ever accomplish it by constantly talking about race and racism. If you want to reduce racism in the world, honestly, the best way would be to just
Let it go, let it go, turn away and slam the door.
Or did I just answer my own question?
You didn't. Not even close.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies.
What studies where? And how many of them are genuinely scientific from reputable sources?
Then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
Because even if there were a few minor variables that may benefit some people more than others in one field and show different benefits to others in a different way or in a different situation, equality of opportunity is still a reality nonetheless. As for discussing the ideas you mentioned being racist, it's because in essence they are, or if not outright racist, they are certainly racialized, though this primarily applies to the supposed solutions to them, such as affirmative action and quotas. These things inherently disregard and harm the very idea of equality of opportunity by granting special privileges, rights, and protections to certain groups at the expense of others, based not on their developed merits such as skill, education, or capability, but purely on the basis of extraneous factors about them such as their skin color, gender, etc., of which they have no control. It's essentially like handing someone a gold medal just for existing, while the one who trained for years to achieve it is forced off the podium entirely.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty.
Clearly an analogy to Black Lives Matter and the kerfuffle about the name. It's a poor analogy, however, because it blatantly ignores the context of the Black Lives Matter / All Lives Matter arguments. Black Lives Matter makes the arguments and pushes the narratives that blacks in this country suffer under the hand of institutional racism, that blacks are regularly and overwhelmingly targeted and killed intentionally by law enforcement simply because of the color of their skin, and that black communities suffer due to this supposed systemic racism, thereby keeping black communities generally impoverished, undereducated, underfunded, and overwhelmed with crime. Essentially, it's all arguments and narratives based solely on a rather powerful victimhood mentality, whereby this and other such groups believe that they are being oppressed and therefore entitled to what they would consider justice, like excusing black criminals just because they're black, or getting a ton of free shit from no effort on their own part. It boils down to the kind of mentality that always places the blame and responsibility on someone else, rather than owning up to the reality and accepting personal responsibility for one's own decisions and the impact these decisions have. We've heard similar arguments like this before. The white man is holding the black man down. It's just 'cause I'm black, huh? It was bullshit then, and it's still bullshit now.
Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Fuck. I honestly think this one might push me past the edge here. Son of a bitch. Okay. Fucking hell. Here we go. Racially insensitive? I would need you first to explain to me how saying all lives matter, a fully and extremely inclusive statement in and of itself, instead of saying Black Lives Matter all its own, is somehow racially insensitive. Is it because it genuinely is, in which case I'd need you to substantiate that, or is it racially insensitive in accordance to your social justice standards, which themselves are not only convoluted, but also outright push the narrative that essentially anything and everything is somehow bigoted? Is it somehow genuinely racially insensitive to disagree with the Black Lives Matter narratives? Is it racially insensitive to disagree with their false narrative of institutional racism? To disagree with their false narrative of police intentionally targeting blacks overwhelmingly due to nothing more than their skin color? To disagree with their false narrative that white people are evil and the cause of all problems their communities suffer from? Is it racially insensitive to simply disagree with them? Is it racially insensitive to understand that it's a terrible tragedy when anyone of any skin color is unjustly shot by the police? that you'll never make any progress in this country, especially on matters of race, by constantly pushing arguments and narratives that could only ever create divisions and tensions? Is it so ridiculous to accept that these troubles, these issues, these incidents can and do happen to people of every creed and color, and to focus on only a single group purely on the basis of repeatedly debunked lies and misinformation from a group who consistently pushes collectivist, divisive, and anti-white sentiments? Is it really so ridiculous and racially insensitive to acknowledge that any injustices perpetrated are something that need to be addressed, no matter the skin color of the victim? Is it really so ridiculous and racially insensitive to see every individual equally across the board, be the circumstances good or bad? You will only ever instigate racial tensions by constantly feeling the need to bring race into anything and everything. Fucking Christ. I can't believe I still have another video to make on this shit. God fucking damn it. That's enough for this video, I think. I honestly couldn't answer another question right now. They're getting to the point of utter retardation. I've already got another one of those migraines coming on. The last one was from like oxygen deprivation or some shit, but this one is just outright from the sheer stupidity involved. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe, and you can go down into the description box to find different links for Ask.fm, Patreon, and all that nonsense. But right now, I can't handle any more of this. I just can't. I just fuck.